Okay, great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today and to talk to you about some of the things I've enjoyed doing at Boeing and to try to give you an overview, a taste test, just a sample of all of the things that we get to do. That's why I named it that way. The theme will only be as far as the buffet part. There are no food pictures in here, sorry about that. So I wanted to start with a cheesy animation. And then I wanted to move into really just telling you about how we design the aircraft itself. So I have been at Boeing both in an engineering capacity, systems engineering and design, as well as in a sales and marketing position, which is what I'm in right now. And the way I've approached UX, user experience, has been very different over the course of my career. So I'm trying to bridge all of that and make it interesting at the same time. So I'm probably going to throw a lot of high-level examples at you, but bear with me. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end to take some questions. So in my current position, we use a lot of qualitative research and a lot of quantitative research. The quantitative tends to come in when we try to sell, right? Because metrics in an engineering company makes a lot of sense. And when you're talking to airline customers, you want to sell using numbers and details that the airline customer will respond to. And since it's a very engineering-driven world, numbers speak volumes. However, when we're trying to design the aircraft interior or the passenger experience of the future, numbers sometimes are, we don't have numbers. So we deal a lot with qualitative methodologies that are pretty darn interesting, and that's what I wanted to describe to you first. I kind of inherited the design of the 87. Sadly, I was not at Boeing when all of the interior design was being done, because as you know, it's at least 10 years ahead of the launch of an airplane. The lead times are very, very long, and you've got to start early. But I wanted to describe a design methodology called archetype discovery. And I'm going to try to simplify it. But in general, it's as all of you know, and I'm sure you all have your own methodologies getting at this, but you can never believe what people say, right? That's the challenge of our industry. They're just going to say what's on the top of the mind. So when you're talking something as interesting, unique, and detailed, and some would say soulful, because it really gets at some unarticulated needs of connecting with people, the world, seeing yourself in a different part of your life. I can go on and on about that, maybe later. We have to get our participants to get rid of all that stuff at the top of their mind, shed more legroom, shed the fact that they want free alcohol, shed the fact of all the things that we don't control. We need deeper nuggets than that. So this process really gets at trying to speed, if you will, call 3-hour sessions speeding someone to those understandings. It's a 3-hour process, and it's designed, one, to really get at the first experience that someone has had with a prompt. Now, any of you guys could use this method yourselves. We happen to be interested in the experience of flight. So our prompt tends to be something around a cabin interior or an airplane experience or flight itself. So we try to run through the first hour, having the participants be able to shed all of those top of mind gripes, concerns, excitements, the stuff that we hear all the time, okay? But we don't want to distance too much from their experiences, so we nod and say, that's really great, we know you want more legroom. That's the first hour. That gets at understanding the cortex, okay? This whole process is based on the theory of the triune brain, which was put forth in the 60s. It was a long time ago, but it's a very simplified view that neuroscientists today would probably have a lot of beef with. They'd probably argue about the details, but because it's so simple, it's very easy for participants to understand, as well as your stakeholders inside your organization. So the hour one, get rid of the cortex. The cortex is the logical side of the brain. We're making decisions. We're using snap judgments. You're appealing to the cortex with logic. The second hour is designed to really get at the limbic system. So the social interaction part of your brain, emotional content, drivers of connecting you with others, that kind of understanding of being part of the group or not part of the group. At this part of the process, our participants are actively, in some ways, creating stories about their experiences related to the prompt. And remember, flight, interior, what have you. So again, that's getting them down a little bit deeper into their own self-understanding and what flying means to them. The third hour is where the magic happens, and it uses a combination of relaxation techniques, calming environment, giving some time alone. Some people tend to fall asleep. We don't necessarily want that, but what we're trying to get at is that very creative time between sleep and wakefulness, or vice versa, a hypnagogic state, if you will. And some of you may have used this in your own needs to be creative. You sort of halfway fall asleep and can really get some interesting nuggets. At this point, we ask them to describe their most sort of poignant moments with the prompt, their first experience with flight, their most powerful experience with flight, and their most recent experience with flight. And they essentially write alone by themselves details that come to mind. And you get some extremely emotionally laden and charged messages. And so at that point, the team then goes in to analyze the structure of those stories, looking for common content, common themes. It's not necessarily the individual details that we're looking for, but we're trying to categorize what flying means to the general public. And this was a technique that we used in the early days of development of the 8.7. And two of the major themes, I would say, that came out of this during the 8.7 days was that flying is magical, even post 9/11, all that, getting strip search and taking your shoes and packing and stressing out you're going to miss the flight. In the end, when people finally nested and sat down in the seat, they really believed that flying is magical. That's very interesting. The second thing is people want to feel welcome on board a plane, because where else do you have such an international culture on board an aircraft? It's a very interesting social experiment. So those are the two major themes that we realized during the Dreamliner 8.7 days. I've since been a part of this technique to try to understand millennials in the aircraft. I won't go into details about that, but it's another example. Another technique that we use is called idealized design. And this is also a lengthy process, again, because we don't want the top of the mind concept. So some of you may be familiar with this. Instead of thinking about all the problems that you have with what you're trying to solve, you take the user, the participant, through a technique that just asks them, if there were no constraints and you could do anything in the whole wide world, what would the ideal experience be on an airplane? And this, again, takes 3 hours because you don't want what's purely the thing they're going to spit out first. This also blends sort of cultural anthropology, archetypal type research, storytelling, all of these techniques to get at what the passenger, what the subject participant is dreaming of for the future. And again, we analyze the storylines that they create, both in a team environment as well as an individual experience. We analyze it for content, and we kind of look at the plot structure. So movies, stories, since the dawn of time, generally there are only a few story plot lines that exist. It's sort of the hero's journey, right? There's Paradise Lost and Found. There's savior moments, and some films, some stories are just day in the life. That has a very flat storyline. But in general, what we see when people dream about flying in an ideal setting, there's usually some sort of recognition that when they start on their journey in an ideal world, they're generally pretty disappointed. Things are pretty stressful, but by the time they get on board, by the time they feel welcomed, and it's the interior of their dream, the flight attendants are anticipating their every need. Some of the stories have people marrying the flight attendant. It's so perfect. Like, everything is just amazing. It's like a spa. I mean, you get all kinds of things. It's really wonderful to be part of the dream. So we're thinking, well, is there any reason we can't have some semblance of that emotion and that feeling in our interior? And so that is where we find sort of the most creative visions. But when you take that roadmap, if you will, there's really no recipe to success when you get an answer like, oh, the flying experience is magical, and oh, I want to marry my flight attendant. There's a lot of work in-house that has to be done to translate those dreamlike findings into an actual aircraft interior. Here's the prompt that we've used in the past for our participants. What is the ideal, the ultimate, the very best interior of a commercial airplane? Simple prompt, right? What could it be if there were no constraints? For that first hour, remember I described you get the top of mind stuff? This happens to be word clouds that were generated when we asked about flying. And the two word clouds almost look exactly the same. One is business class and first class experience, and one is economy class. But isn't that interesting? I can't really tell much of a difference. So great, we're all the same, huh? No matter where we fly. So that's really the deliverable from hour 1. And this is the deliverable from hour 3, the storytelling part, okay? When people are alone with their own thoughts in a semi-dreamlike state, inspired state. I mean, if you stick a microphone up to somebody and say, tell me what you want your flying experience to be like, would you ever in a million years come up with a statement like this? This is like poetry from your regular average participant off the street in Seattle. We happen to do most of the tests for this idealized design and storytelling work in Seattle. You can't really argue with that. I mean, I've not been able to find another technique that gets me statements like that. Another way that we conduct research that may be more familiar to you is experimental research, okay? So inviting people into a real interior and giving their opinion, giving their perspective on whatever it happens to be in the cabin. We have a facility up north. If those of you are not from Everett, it is called the Future of Flight. And it is an independent museum. It is not affiliated with Boeing. However, it is the launch site for the Boeing factory tour. And if some of you have time to kill this weekend, whatever, I highly recommend you make a trip up there because it actually gets you into the factory. The world's biggest building by volume. It is awesome. So in any case, this takes advantage of a multicultural group of visitors that tend to flock to the facility in the summertime from all over the world. And this facility is an interior of a cabin. It's got seats. You may see something that's a little strange here. I'm showing you this picture because the windows look a little odd, right? This is actually the facility where we used and surveyed attendees of this museum, this Future of Flight, and we asked them about window shape, size, and location. This is one of the ways we gathered enough information to understand the Dreamliner window. And if any of you have flown on the Dreamliner, you will know that's something Boeing makes a big deal about, passengers make a big deal about, and I'll tell you more about that later. It is, it's not a very long duration. It's about 15 minutes to give, information, but it is international. And it's a really wonderful resource that we have here. It's just sort of waiting to be used, if you will. Another thing that we do is in-flight research. So once we have designed the cabin and it's flying, this is really where the value comes in terms of sales campaigns. So part of my job is not just to get involved with that qualitative, forward-looking, futuristic research, what's going to happen around the corner for the next new airplanes, but it's also how are we doing today in the market? Is there a real preference that we can prove between our airplane and the competition? And that requires doing in-flight research because it's most relevant and it gets at a cross-section of people who may be coming from time zone A, B, C to Z. Maybe they've had a bad experience. Maybe the flight attendants have treated them a certain way. Maybe their bags, they've had positive experience, negative experiences. We need the real in-service data. I wanted to backtrack just a little bit to take advantage of this slide with the perfect lives that these people are living, right? Yeah, marketing, right? Okay. I just wanted to go through as if I had you as part of my guests in the Customer Experience Center. Another part of my job and another thing that Boeing has, facility, is the CEC. It's down in Renton. We have airline CEOs come by for a visit. We have media come by, and we have full-size mock-ups, kind of like show cars, if you will, where you can set foot inside one of our airplanes and experience it. What are you actually going to be purchasing? Let's instead of looking at two-dimensional images, let's actually get you in the space. So I'll take you on a tour of the 87 as if I had you in the mock-up. to answer how we translated some of those qualitative findings into the actual interior. So bear with me for a second. Here's the entryway. If I had you here, I would have you walk through this door, and most of you would just be like, wow, this is amazing. You look up, and the plane actually gives the impression of being bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, and that's frequently what I hear quite a bit. There's a dome. I don't know if you can make that out, or later you can go Google image search some of the Dreamliner dome. That is designed to give passengers a sense of spaciousness. Remember the word cloud? Spacious? It's huge. So if you can have people look up and really immediately be confronted with an experience that's unlike any other airplane they've ever been on before, and unlike what they've just come from, which is a squeezed jet bridge. It's hot, stuffy. I just got all my belongings. I can barely keep everything together. And then all of a sudden you're confronted with that. Wow, that's a huge severance from the real world to the world of Boeing. That's what we hope. Now, not everybody's going to know it's a Boeing aircraft. The day that happens, I'll probably be out of a job, because it's my main position is to showcase the benefits of our airplane. But that welcome that you experience when you first walk on board, and that magic, is an example of how we took some of those high-level themes and translated it into the built environment. The bins are huge and spacious. We paid close attention to the first touch points that a passenger would have. You can see the handles. They look a little different than normal handles you may find on a stow bin. You can open it either way. If you press the button, press the top of the button, press the bottom of the button. We call it the push me, pull me latch. I kind of name it the genius latch, because you can open it no matter how you use it. It's a really wonderful experience to know that you can stow your bag even if you haven't flown in 15 years. It's okay. The overhead is arched, very calming lines, very smooth. There's no jagged edges or anything harsh that an eye would pick up as disruptive, as disconcerting, as stressful. We want the interior, some would say it's a little bland, and that's actually kind of something we want. Also, because it's not really our job to plaster Boeing all over the interior of an airplane. We sell this to airlines. They want their brand plastered all over this. So we have to keep the palette, if you will, the neutral palette. And then through lighting, through branding, through color decisions, choices, through the seat decisions. Boeing doesn't make seats, I don't know if you knew that, but the airlines decide what they want to put inside the interior. So the things that we control, we try to make relatively neutral, still exciting, because it is supported by our research as well. Whoops. It's a Boeing thing. Those guys understand, the Boeing folks in the audience. Any case. The blue light is a huge part of the Boeing sky interior, and that is a trademark thing that we talk about. The Boeing sky interior gives a sense of spaciousness. It gives lighting in the overhead, the sense of blue sky above, connecting passengers to being immersed in the experience. It's like, hey, you, wake up. You're actually doing something really cool. You're flying, you're disconnected from Earth. This is wonderful. Another way we do this is the window shape. So you saw the window shape in the test bed, right? It didn't look like this because, well, that wasn't actually preferred. But the window shape we have flying today is the largest window available on a passenger aircraft today. It's not only the tallest, but it's also the widest. And it's positioned so that if you're seated in the middle of the plane, you can look to the left or the right and have a window seat. So every seat in the airplane is a window view. It's a very democratic airplane. Even if you're in business, even if you're in economy, whatever service, we want you to look outside. And the key point here that was uncovered with some of that earlier research I discussed was being able to see the horizon line. We never would have gotten that had we not done that research. Why is that? Well, anytime you're disconnected, a little unsure of where you are in three-dimensional space, we look to our anchor points, right? The horizon is something we've always looked towards. So if you can see that while you're flying, it gives a sense of calm. Thank you. I want to take it out to orbit, low Earth orbit. So all the stuff I just described is as relevant to the experience in space as it is to, well, on Earth, on a plane, disconnected slightly from the Earth. Here, this is a concept interior that my team developed. I was just transitioning from product development into sales and marketing. And as you know, Boeing won the lion's share of the NASA contract award for the space shuttle replacement. Our craft is called the CST-100 Starliner. This is a concept interior. One day when space tourism becomes more realistic, what are the elements of an interior that are going to make people want to fly for, people like you and me eventually one day? So the very things we were just talking about, having magic, having a sense of a view outside, connecting you to the experience, making you feel very calm. I mean, this is going to be especially important for this experience, right? The feeling of calm. I also wanted to use this as a launching pad for, no pun intended, but for the following points I'm going to make, which is not only do we have this qualitative research that we have to drive into a design, but we also have to deal with how the real world actually works, how airlines make money, and just the facts, ma'am, really. Because you can spend all of your days in qualitative, but until you can actually transition it to a product that makes revenue, you're kind of up a creek. So let's talk about that for a second. It is, sadly, at this point in time, and at certain levels of discussions with airlines, it is all about seats. So we don't really see that changing so much, and Boeing gets the lion's share of complaints about it, about legroom and seat choice, and I wish you could make my life different. The fact is, that's actually an airline decision. We counsel them on things like seat recline and what kind of in-flight entertainment you should offer, and even if you have really short pitch and you stick a seat recline in there that's very generous, what are you doing? You're like ruining the experience for the person behind you. So all of these things are intertwined, okay? Our competition talks a lot about seat width, but we have ample evidence, and I think they do too, they just don't talk about it, that seat width actually is not tightly correlated to overall passenger satisfaction. It's the stuff we've been talking about before, the connecting to the outside, the feeling that you're involved in something greater than yourself, the small usability features and traits that are in the cabin, lighting, etc. So seats, revenue generating seats, the more seats you can fit in, even in business class is starting to move that way. You're seeing these nested herringbone designs that still give a full flat experience, but are densifying the business class. This is the time where we have a gratuitous animal slide in here, so we can all say, oh, so cute. I can tie this in though. So last month, I had Qantas come by for a visit, and they are launching the longest 787 route in history from Perth to London. That's 17 hours. I hope that we can claim at the end of 17 hours that we still have some magic of flight. I'm not sure though. We're gonna have to do some, we're gonna have to maybe do some things. So Qantas, Koala Bear, what does Qantas do with their pilots? Sleeping. Where do the pilots sleep? So we have something called a crew rest, which I also describe when I'm in the mock-up as like a tree house, because it's hidden away from the public, from the economy class, from the business class. It's actually up at the overhead. And I wanted to share with you what that looks like. This is getting to the point of revenue. Again, seats mean money. If you don't have a crew rest or a flight attendant rest, and you have a 17-hour flight, where are these folks going to rest? They'll probably be in some sort of business class seat. Do you want to occupy business class seat, a revenue generating seat with a pilot? Not to mention like the disconnect people are going to have by seeing like, whoa, what are you doing here? The days of drone airplanes are here. Oh my gosh. Okay, we don't want to freak people out. But this is a real image of an 8-7 bunk bed, if you will. It's not showing the other side, which has a full height standing area in the staircase to put on your jammies and then put your uniform back on, but also has a taxi takeoff and landing business class-like seat that's very luxurious as well. But here they have sound dampening curtains, bolsters, mattress, they have their own telephone, any kind of emergency equipment. They can still communicate with the crew. But the point is, this is located far away from where there's more noise with passengers, more disruption, and they get a much better quality sleep. So again, this falls back to crew and passenger experience, but also revenue. Surface area is something I wanted to touch on just briefly. So we're starting to see ancillary revenue becoming huge in the aircraft cabin. So how are other ways you can make money besides just putting people in seats? And I can imagine a day when maybe you'll get paid to fly if you're willing to have a certain type of experience where you're bombarded with product, or maybe you promise to buy $25 worth on the plane through a galley cart, duty-free situation, or something that's on board, Amazon is selling you something special you can only get on the airplane. Surface area is going to become a very interesting way to add value to the airline and also to the passenger, because you can have your own crafted experience how you want it if you can start to take advantage of other surface areas, destination spaces, for example. It's going to become more important. So if you look in the annals of history of design, of aircraft design, you will find there's a tight link towards military design. This is a picture of a Navy ship, a galley. Apparently Tuesday nights or one night a week is pizza night on ships. I just like this picture. The days of being stuck with what you first order on your airplane, those days are limited. They're numbered. Airplanes are around for a really long time, like 40 years. And business models change, airlines change over that time, airplanes change hands, ownership. The original owner shouldn't have to dictate the galley design of three owners hence, right? So becoming more modular is going to be a very important feature in the future. We are investigating that, of course, but it's a little more challenging because Boeing doesn't manufacture these products. So we have other ways to influence those commodity experts. Customization is also very important. I mentioned the whole concept of brand. Our airline customers really want you to remember their brand, and also that they're flying a Boeing airplane, or in some cases they're very proud of their Airbus airplanes too, but they want their brand first and foremost. So how do we as a company allow enough choice when a customer purchases the plane, and maybe even choice down the road post-delivery, so that an airline can change the look? You go from a luxury setup to a budget setup. That should all be possible, and we have to allow for all of those features. Oh man, how many of us have felt like that? I gotta get my bag on board. I'm gonna bolt to make sure I'm first in line. Stowage is something we can't escape either. And when the airlines decide to offer, to charge for checked bags, that has ramifications for us, because now everybody wants to bring their bag on board and we need bigger bins. Now eventually it's gonna have to stop, right? Because we can't be sleeping flat because the stowage bins are so large over our heads. But I'm just touching briefly on this. This is a concern for us. We have to think about how the use factor is, how it feels to open and close these bins multiple times. Do passengers know how to use it? Do they know how to stow their bags, et cetera, et cetera? There's something very psychological about having your stuff near you as well, which we know from some of the earlier research. So there's no real way around this. In general, we have a rule there's a 1 bag per passenger. So if you come on board with 1 bag, you will have space for your bag on the airplane. We have to facilitate both people traveling in groups and people traveling alone. So the group dynamic, this kid running through the aisles, they even did that back then. Are we able to sit together as a family? Is it easy? There are ways that we can help make that transition. We can make it easier. The group dynamic, I want to sit with my family. I don't want to sit with my coworkers. I want an individual experience. This is relevant in space. This is relevant on board the airplane. And actually what we've learned is it can be a somewhat really introspective, unique time when you are disconnected, if you will. And I know some of you may have had this experience yourselves, but it's a special time and not necessarily the time we only want people to zone out and watch movies. It's actually a time when people are otherwise unoccupied and can kind of take stock of their lives. And to get back to the qualitative research, we actually saw this quite a bit. People landed as a better person than when they took off, thanks to the airplane. Cool, huh? I mean, I feel that way a lot. I always feel like I need to use this time. I'm not gonna waste it on movies. I should think about my life and my goals and 2018 New Year's resolutions. I should start thinking now because nobody can bother me. I mean, I know that runs through our heads and then we usually devolve and watch movies, but we can accommodate that too. The wow factor. So the 787 has a wow factor, and people usually say it when they come on board because of that dome, because of the way it looks so different. Future airplanes have to have this wow factor too, because that's when people notice it's different than anything else they've flown on. So how do you quantify wow? I'm working on it, but it's not easy. But this is something we always try to design for, so it looks different and unique. And then, of course, there's a door-to-door experience. How consistent is your experience on the single-aisle airplane that also has a modified Boeing Sky Interior, by the way? You can see the pivot bins and the blue light connecting you to Sky. Calming, similar shape of the window reveal, you can see. How do we connect that experience you had on a single aisle to maybe your next flight, which might be on a 87? And maybe your next flight is on the CST Starliner. There should be something that links all of those experiences together if you're paying attention that, oh yeah, I've seen this before. This is very consistent. So we think about these questions across all of our products. Okay, now I'm gonna bring it home. Yeah, there's Seattle, there's the airplane. So because I promised to give you a user experience buffet, I'm going to go back into the Boeing company to give you a few examples of what I find to be very interesting. I have some of my friends and peers and colleagues in this room who can back me up on some of these examples. And just for the record, it's been a very long time since I've been sort of hands-on UX. I had one success, I'd like to call it, the Gil Barco Gas Pump design, when we transitioned from the embedded soft touch button to the actual Coke vending machine style buttons. That was me. So that was probably the last time I actually got to see something I designed directly implemented because the lead times are so long for a lot of this Boeing work. A lot of people touch it. But I wanted to touch on some really high-level examples, things that I have found interesting, that I have encountered at the Boeing company. So the factory is an amazing experience to go visit. And if you go on that factory tour, you will be on a balcony level, but you'll be able to see all of the humming and buzzing. In reality, it's not as buzzy as you think because so much of it is now automated and we have a moving line. It's very, very calm. But when you're walking through some of the aisleways, and the building is huge, you see these moving vehicles, you see people with cell phones still using them, even though we're not necessarily supposed to. I mean, it's hard to break habits when you're at work, when you're driving, when you're at home. The same thing happens in a factory setting. So we have launched a huge safety program. It's been in play for a long, long time. It's called Go for Zero, and we're driving to, zero injuries eventually in the workplace. And one of the interventions that was introduced as part of that program was the Blue Light Special. Remember Kmart's Blue Light Special? I think it's just such a simple design. I don't actively work in this environment all the time, but I remember the first time I was walking through the factory, I was just talking to somebody and there was this blue light following me and I have no idea what's going on. You turn around and it's a moving vehicle on a separate path. I mean, pedestrians and vehicles do not share the same path, but it's giving you an indication that something's coming your way. And it's a very noisy environment. It can be in the factory, depending on where you work. So a lot of people are walking around with their earplugs in permanently. Maybe they're looking at their cell phone too. So this is an example, I think, clever, very simple intervention of getting people to look up and be aware of their surroundings. This is a very simple example. Now everybody has to track their time, right? At work. So how many hours, lawyers do it, we all do it, right? What project did you bill to? This is an example of a time card from, I want to say the 90s sometime. We actually got it off of our intro web, and I'm able to show it because it's so old. It's kind of not really relevant to what we do today. It says 88 on there? Oh, great. Yeah, sorry. To the day, December 2nd, 1988. Fantastic. Okay. Now, without being too negative about our timekeeping system, there have been some changes that have been made, but this paper time card made its way onto the web. And for a long time, we've been entering our time using a very, some would say primitive system, taken really from this time card. And so we have an in-house task. We have an in-house crowdsourced design project of redesigning the ETS, Employee Timekeeping System. And it's very cool because everyone knows it. It's one thing that is common amongst all of our experiences at the Boeing company, which is really pretty rare because everyone works in their own little pocket, niche, neck of the woods. And to have a design challenge that crosses all areas of expertise is a pretty fun project. So that's constantly running, and soon we hope to have a timekeeping system that will work better with the rest of us and not have the archaic artifacts as we deal with today. So now I'm going to get close to the end here. I have a riddle for you. So I want to ask you, what do sheep have in common with Coke bottles? And I apologize for the clip art, but this is Boeing, and I can't use a Coke bottle as much as I want to get it through library services, okay? Does anyone have any guesses? And I know you've never heard this joke before. This is like a Boeing, not even a Boeing joke, I just made it up. I would say the thing that's in common is a 787 flight deck. So this example I want to use here is some questions you may have always had about a cockpit of an airplane. Why is there sheepskin on the pilot seats? Have you ever noticed that across all airplanes? Okay, well, take a look left next time you board your airplane if the door is still open. Guaranteed there's sheepskin on these seats. And the tie-in with Coke bottle is, as you know, if you can't fit your Coke in the cup holder, it's a pretty disappointing experience as a pilot. So the sheepskin is actually on the pilot seats because it has nice, comfortable temperature regulation, whether you're hot, you won't be too hot, you won't be too cold, and it also is very wicking. So moisture management is a big deal if you're sitting in a cockpit seat for umpteen hours, right? And then the whole Coke bottle thing, as part of this presentation, I wanted to gather some interesting stories for you. And I spoke to the original designers of the cockpit, and they told me that one of their biggest coups, at least publicly recognized, was getting metric and imperial bottles, soda bottles, cups, to fit in the 87 flight deck. And we all know this, like some of the most commonly referred to benefits of car cabin design is the cup holder. Thank you for putting a cup holder in there. I just want you to know that even in aircraft cabin design, cup holders are a big deal too. And I wanted to share with you my take on the future of challenges for the Boeing company briefly. I've been part of a strategy project looking at the passenger experience for 2050. That's been really interesting. What are going to be the disruptions that we might come across? But I think as part of that project, we came up with a model that's going to be familiar to us. The old days of work, where work is boxed in and you only work within these hours and you don't handle fun, traveling family, you handle all of those things outside of work and outside of the airplane cabin because you have to turn off your connectivity, your interests and everything else just because the airplane can't support the tasks that you want to accomplish. Now, tomorrow, and beyond, we're going to have seamlessness. This is going to be a huge part of how we redefine our work life, how we redefine life on an airplane. We need Boeing and suppliers and everyone else has to get with the program more easily. And so do a lot of organizations, a lot of companies. We have to allow us to work this way and to design for it in advance. The next thing, I'm putting this on here for a laugh. You'll recognize Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and somebody scribbled internet on the bottom, which I thought was very, very clever. Again, thanks to the Boeing scrutiny of my slides, I wasn't able to put the real photo I wanted on here, which is an excerpt from Harvard Business Review. It's an article called The Elements of Value, and so I'm speaking it so you guys can look up the hierarchy that I'm about to speak about next. But I want you to go search that out because it's a wonderful way of combining elements that organizations typically believe in at the bottom of the pyramid, like making revenue, functional attributes of a product, functional attributes of a business. This goes from the products that a business develops to the culture that is involved. So we're going, the pyramid goes like this, from functional to emotional, to life-changing, to self-transcendence at the very top of the pyramid. And if you find this article, you may find it as a useful tool in your own work when you're trying to describe or prove your value to your leadership. In fact, I had it as my screensaver just recently, and my manager came by, he's like, that's really cool, what is that? And as a result, it's getting circulated around. But let me describe the functional level. So functional is like, saves time, earns money, avoids hassles, things like that we can all agree with, right? Makes the sale. Yes, businesses should be operating at that level at all times. Emotional, as a product or an organization, does it meet my needs? Do I feel like I'm belonging? Do I feel an affiliation with my coworkers? Do I feel valued? Do I feel rewarded? Move up a next level, life-changing experiences. Is there something I can pass on to the next generation? Will my life have value? Those kinds of things. Does my company stand for the right values? Can I align with that? One step up in terms of the triangle, the hierarchy of needs. And then finally, the self-transcendence. There are a few companies that operate at that. It's really social impact. If a company can access all of these levels, elements of value, the more the better. The better your revenue will be, the better your profits, and the happier your people will be. So I can think of Tom's, for example, right? Tom's is a great example of meeting that self-transcendence top of the pyramid. And I would say that is perhaps Boeing's biggest challenge, many of your company's biggest challenges for the future, because we are bringing so much, such a wiser community, such a more knowledgeable level of understanding of our own lives, who we are, and what we expect from the world around us, that we have to be operating at all levels of this pyramid. And with that, I hope I have 5 minutes for questions. I covered a lot. Thank you for hanging with me. And I hope I conveyed that there's a lot going on at the Boeing company in terms of usability, user experience. And if I could, I would be involved in all of it, and I know we would too.